welcome to our special coverage here. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. as Prime Minister Modi gets ready to meet with President Trump, the first meeting between the two leaders. Joining us here to take us through the expectations and what we should realistically expect from this meeting is the former U.S. Ambassador to India, Timothy Roemer. He was in India between 2009 and 2011. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Let me start by asking you what you make of the expectations ahead of this visit. I mean, Prime Minister Modi has said he expects the next few decades to be an even more remarkable story of ambitious horizons, convergent action, and shared growth. How would you interpret that?
Well, I think, first of all, that both Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi are going to talk about how do we deepen the strategic interests and the economic relationship between these two great democracies. It's not only a relationship between two democracies and two countries, it's the people, the Indian people, the American people that are so close. I think you'll see some announcements in the next 24 hours about deepening that strategic relationship, particularly on the defense side and the counterterrorism side. I'm not surprised if there might be, some discussions on topics that they don't agree on. They should talk about those things.
So you think they may talk about H-1B as an issue of disagreement, for instance?
I know the press says they will not. That will not come up.
You think that it will?
When I met with Mr. Modi a couple months ago in New Delhi, we met with him for about an hour. It certainly came up, and he was very passionate about it and very articulate about it and very forceful about his side, and I'm sure he would get the same kind of passion and forcefulness from Mr. Trump. Look, in any kind of relationship, and as strong as the U.S.-India relationship is, how much Mr. Obama has invested in it, and Mr. Bush and Mr. Clinton before him, managing disagreement is as important as strengthening and deepening the relationship strategically. So how does Mr. Trump reconcile with Mr. Modi his America first and Mr. Modi's make in India? There are ways to talk about that. Trying to get a bilateral investment treaty signed, try to find ways to get the states to cooperate more on economic agreements. What is the new paradigm that the U.S. and India can put together now that TPP is gone?
Yeah.
What are we going to do about trade? How do we make sure the Chinese don't fill that vacuum, but the U.S. continues to be one of India's strongest trade partners, not only on economics and trade, benefiting both our countries, but I know Mr. Modi's very interested in foreign direct investment coming from the United States into India.
You know, since you talked about trade, let me ask you on that issue. We have seen bilateral trade between the two countries go up to about $115 billion in 2016. Today, in his op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister Modi has not talked about that $500 billion number, which has, of course, been the target on the table for a while now. He's just said that he expects trade to go up many-fold. So do you believe that perhaps there is a hesitation now on whether that $500 billion number is going to be achievable?
I think it absolutely is achievable. Maybe something more realistic, 300 to 400 billion in the next 5 to 10 years. But they have to talk about how to get there. I know on the U.S. side, we're very concerned about how our pharmaceutical companies are treated in India. We're concerned about intellectual property rights being protected in India. India is concerned about H-1B visas. Infosys just announced they're going to hire 10,000 Americans in the next 5 years or so. So
2 years, actually.
2 years, that's a pretty good goal if it's reachable, if it's pragmatic and not just a idealistic goal. So I think there's a lot of promise in there, but working out the details on these things, not being afraid to take on some of these economic and trade relationship issues because they are the elephant in the room. They are one of the issues that we have to make some progress on.
You know, since you talked about the elephant in the room, and I'll go back to address the H-1B issue. And again, if I look at what the Prime Minister has said in his op-ed, and he's talked about the creative and entrepreneurial energy of our engineers, scientists and researchers, and the need for free movement between both countries to help India and the U.S. retain their innovation edge and maintain competitiveness in the knowledge economy. So is that a veiled sort of reference to try and get the Trump administration to at the issue of high-skilled workers and free movement?
Well, when Mr. Obama came to India in 2010, what we tried to do is talk about the trade relationship in a win-win scenario. How do we manufacture things in the United States like C-17 aircraft, like gas turbine engines that are built in South Carolina and create jobs and ship these to India? Not jobs, product. That benefits the United States. And India creating thousands of new jobs in the United States through maybe a modified H-1B visa system. Mr. Modi explains why that's beneficial for the United States to bring the best brain power in the world into our country to help create new thriving entrepreneurial jobs and still maintain our security. And I think Mr. Modi making the argument as well that you cannot, if you're Mr. Trump, simply look at the U.S.-India relationship through a binary lens. What's the deficit? Is that good or bad for overall relationships? We know the strategic relationship between the United States and India is crucial. Maritime security, the Indian Ocean, being tougher on Pakistan with radical groups. Dual investment by the U.S. and India in Afghanistan, being tougher on China. Those are all in our strategic interests. We shouldn't give up those kind of goals simply because there may be a trade deficit with India. We can work that through, we can improve that, but let's not let the Trump administration simply say, that's a problem and that's going to derail progress in every other area of this critical strategic relationship between the United States and India.
Since you talked about joint efforts on combating terror, and this is again something the Prime Minister has spoken of, that both India and the US have an overriding interest in securing societies in the world from the focus of terrorism and radical ideologies. What would your expectation be from this visit in particular, and this meeting in particular, on that issue?
We really stressed this in historic new ways with the Obama administration. When I met with Barack Obama in the White House in 2008, 2009, before I came to India, we talked about how do we deepen intel sharing with India? How do we deepen counterterrorism agreements? How do we develop a homeland security dialogue? How do we share more information with the Indians on maritime security? And quite frankly, China's expansion into the area. These were all breakthrough areas for the Obama administration in deepening the strategic partnership with India. I'm hopeful that the Trump administration, now after 6 months, will finally agree that these are all areas to deepen and broaden our relationship. I hear there might be an announcement about the Guardian drones, about a $2 billion sale of unarmed drones to India. I would highly support that and think that's a positive step forward. I think there needs to be an expansion of the U.S.-India Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. Secretary Ash Carter worked very hard on that relationship. I'm hopeful Mr. Mattis, the new Defense Secretary, will do that as well. And I think refreshing the Homeland Security dialogue, keeping up that security relationship, helping India protect itself from terrorism will be key. And then finally, foreign policy. Mr. Trump has not articulated where he is yet on Pakistan. I think Mr. Obama was very clear that the U.S. will not support Pakistan's initiating any kind of background support for radical groups of terrorism, and I hope Mr. Trump will be very clear on that front.
Okay. On defense in specific, and I know that the Prime Minister has met with both the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson this morning as well as the Defense Secretary. Do you believe that we're likely to see a push for more G2G engagement as far as defense deals are concerned?
I do, and I think there's a lot of potential for that. Again, in the Obama administration and going back to the Bush administration before that, we looked at more cooperation with heavy lift equipment, Apache helicopters, the kind of equipment like C-17s that India can use not only for its defense, but for humanitarian reasons and responses for regional help to other countries when there's a tsunami or an earthquake. India can be a leader regionally and globally in that front when they buy that kind of equipment from the United States. I think expanding that defense relationship in the next 4 or 5 years, particularly on the naval side, finding ways that the two of us, the United States and India, can cooperate more on maritime security. I know India is very interested in anti-piracy efforts. They're also very interested in more cooperation and exercises potentially with the United States Navy and, maybe buying some new technology as well as the drone technology, which will help secure maritime security issues and India's defense.
Since we're talking about elephants in the room and you mentioned China,
I knew that opened up an opportunity for you that you're taking full advantage of.
So do you think that there is going to be a meeting of minds and ground, so to speak, on the issue of dealing with China? I mean, India is not part of the OBOR. The U.S. did manage to send a junior level delegation to the summit. How do you see this play out?
Well, look, if we can come out of this initial meeting with Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi agreeing on one basic premise, that a strong India is in the United States' interests and a strong America is in the people of India's interests, that goes a long way toward addressing the issue of China. I think China looks for opportunities and openings and vacuums. It has taken the Trump administration a little bit longer to transition than most American administrations, appointing a U.S. ambassador to India, which should be a priority coming out of the gate. I'm hopeful to hear about that soon. We hear rumors about that we're going to have people appointed at the necessary levels at the State Department and Defense Department to implement and execute on policy that Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump decide to go forward on for the next 3.5 years in this administration. There are many vacant positions right now that need to be filled in order to work on this relationship and implement what they agree to. So I think those kind of things are key. And then finally, I found in my experience in government, from being in Congress, working at the State Department, being a U.S. ambassador, it's very important for the U.S. and the Indian sides to identify the leadership coming out of this meeting. On the Indian side, maybe it's Mr. Jaishankar, the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Jaitley, the Finance Minister and Defense Minister, dual-hatted, Mr. Ajit Doval. And then on the U.S. side, it's Mr. Mattis at Defense, it's Mr. Tillerson, it's somebody at NSC, and maybe Wilbur Ross at the Commerce. These people need to be fully engaged on a week-to-week basis and a day-to-day basis to implement the outcomes of what these two leaders will decide to do moving forward. And you can't do that lurching, month to month or 6 months to 6 months and have a sustainable, strategic, deep, long-lasting strategic relationship that we have had and we need to continue to have in this relationship.
Well, we hope that that does happen, but you were ambassador between 2009 and 2011. As you go back to India today and see what's changed on the ground, what do you believe has been the biggest difference?
Well, I think what's best about the U.S.-India relationship has been so far what hasn't changed. The two peoples travel all the time between the two countries, bringing us together at the non-G to G level, the family to family level, the business to business level. When I would make speeches and talk to people all over India, big cities, rural communities, I'd ask people, where would they most like to go in the world? Where would they want to travel? What's their number one destination? And inevitably, it was almost always the United States of America. What isn't changing is the mutual respect between the two peoples. And we need to take full advantage of that moving forward, continue to find innovative ways to broaden and deepen this strategic relationship, work through some of the problems, not be afraid to discuss and dialogue on those things, not pretend they don't exist, but That's what these meetings at the White House and the State Department and Capitol Hill are for, is how are we resolving some differences to continue to move this relationship forward? As I said earlier, oftentimes it's more important in relationships, whether it's a marriage or an international relationship, to talk through what you disagree on and manage those disagreements than even broadening and deepening the relationship. I think we can do both.
You think you can do both, and you believe that the disagreements shouldn't get in the way of extending this partnership and this relationship. Let me end then by asking you, what do you miss about India the most?
The food, the cricket, and the travel. Some of my whitewater rafting trips up on the Holy Ganges River way up north were just absolutely unforgettable. Also, tiger park visits to Kaziranga and Ranthambore and even the Sundarbans, where I saw a tiger and I was told you never see a tiger in the Sundarbans. And the people are just so much like America. They put family first, they work hard, so industrious about life, and yeah, I'm so fortunate and blessed and happy that I get back to India often, 2 or 3 times a year, and get to renew my friendships with all the people that I've met over my time in India. And I look forward to future visits.
Well, Tim Roemer, a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the show, and we hope to see you back in India.
I look forward to it, always do. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much.